Payday Super Shift. Welcome to IO Insolvency Options with Darren Vardy, the Managing Director of Insolvency Options and a registered liquidator with over 30 years of experience helping businesses and individuals navigate financial challenges. In today's episode, Darren examines the massive changes coming to payroll and superannuation and reveals how these shifts will impact small businesses' cash flow. He explains the risk of personal liability for directors and why the 1 July deadline is a critical turning point for business viability. You'll learn about the transition to Payday Super, the closure of the Small Business Superannuation Clearinghouse, and how to manage more frequent cash outflows. I'm your co-host Anthony Pearl. Let's dive into unlocking more about insolvency options. Darren, as we're about to air this episode, where this should come perhaps with some warning sirens going around for small businesses, there are massive changes to payroll to superannuation that impact all small businesses. Talk me through the changes and indeed what the impact is going to be and how we're going to see some people falling into perhaps knocking on your door.
Yeah. So what we have coming 1 July is a change to the national superannuation legislation. And what is being introduced is what is to be known as Payday Super. Now, what that means is that Australian employers must pay their employees superannuation guarantee contributions at the same time as their normal salaries and wages, rather than what has typically been on a quarterly basis. So this mandate is actually aimed to further reduce that unpaid superannuation obligations to the employees. Superannuation is part of an employee's entitlement. It is something that must be paid at the rate over and above their gross wages. We've seen with the director penalty regime and making directors personally liable for outstanding super, that has had a significant impact in reducing or minimising any unpaid super to employees. However, with superannuation, particularly where it's paid on a quarterly basis, if a business is incurring some cash flow difficulties or financial hardship, quite often they find it hard to provide for that lump sum quarterly payment of super. So what the purpose of the Payday Super is for it to be paid at the same time as wages and for the cash flow, for want of a better term, streamed, so there eliminates the lumpy payments to be made on a quarterly basis.
Yeah, it seems logical on that level that it will help small businesses in the sense that there isn't this huge amount all the time and it's a consistent amount. But of course, the problem with small business as well is that you're impacted by cash flow and it has a domino effect, doesn't it? You get one key client that is impacted by its own cash flow problems and someone being slow to pay, etc. And then it has a flow-on effect down the line.
Yes, that's it. And look, cash flow management will be key with all of this, particularly where contributions are to arrive in super funds within 7 business days of the payday to avoid SGC, superannuation guarantee charge. And we all know that any monies owing on SGC, any interest payable on SGC isn't claimable as a deduction. So it's really important that business owners review their cash flow and look at getting that right with the quarterly payments becoming obsolete. And businesses now need to actually pay more frequently. But I do believe that whilst there will be more frequent cash outflows, I would suggest that that might be a lot easier to manage.
So from your perspective, Darren, you've dealt with a lot of businesses over an extended period of time. There are, these kinds of payments, superannuation and the like, often being accrued and leading to businesses going insolvent and closing up. Do you think that we're going to have a period now where this shift may actually impact and increase that for a little bump in the road and that it should actually slow down the impact that you've seen over the years of businesses being unable to pay some of these things and being part of the reason why they close?
I'd suggest so, yes. I think that probably for the first 12 months, it will be a little chaotic. And there may be an acceleration of a number of businesses that enter into external administration because they need to pay the superannuation sooner, i.e. payday, rather than later, i.e. quarterly. Because I think the position is this: If the business is unable to pay its debts as and when they fall due, question really needs to be asked as to the viability of the business and why the business is continuing to exist if it can't pay those liabilities as they are due.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be an interesting ride, isn't it? I mean, I think the question for small business is, and this might be something that you look at when you go into a business where they are knocking on your door because the administration is a real possibility. What sort of systems do they need to have in place? How do small businesses need to change and cope with this?
Look, it's expected that the majority of accounting systems will have an upgrade to enable the payment of Payday Super come July. But what business owners will need to do is need to review their accounting systems and ensure that they will be updated to provide for the new Payday Super regime coming in. Payroll systems must be updated to ensure the calculations are correct, but also to ensure that the super is paid in real time. And what we're finding is that from the 30th of June, the small business superannuation clearinghouse will no longer be available. So users really need to look to transition to an alternative option to enable the payment of their employees' super. So we're now 7 weeks out from 30 June. So time is now for business owners to start looking at that.
When it comes to all of this sort of stuff, there's a lot of pressure on small business. And now they're looking at their books and they're going, oh, we're going to have a problem. Is it going to lead to potentially some unemployment? A business is going to say, well, look, we've got one staff too many now. And whilst when the cash flow is a little bit better, we can afford to carry that. And on a quarterly basis, you can potentially carry that a little bit further. Now, because of this, is that going to be a reality, do you think?
I think there's probably a couple of different scenarios that will be the reality. Firstly, if a business is carrying too many staff and is unable to cover the cost of employment, there will need to be some redundancies. We also look at the situation where we talk about capacity and productivity, and where instead of employing a new staff member, a business owner will look at the productivity within and the capacity within and look to absorb the additional work that needs to be done as opposed to employing a new staff member. And that will have a critical impact on, in my view, the country's unemployment.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of pressure on at the moment, isn't there, with all of these things? I mean, in many respects, with all the pressures on externally that are going on in the world at the moment, interest rates going up and the like, this is another hard thing for small business, isn't it?
It's another change. And, people traditionally don't like change. And it's something that is being forced upon all businesses. So the earlier that the business owner looks at what needs to be done, make sure that they're ready for it and they're comfortable with it, the better they will be during the transition period.
And how does the process going to work if a small business misses a deadline? Like, how much leeway is there? Is it right? It's 12:01, so just after midnight, and are we getting an alert from the ATO saying you haven't paid your superannuation? How will the process work?
As I understand it, it's a voluntary disclosure. So if payment is not made on time to the superannuation funds, the business owner has a voluntary disclosure regime whereby they must complete the ATO forms to advise the ATO that they've not paid on time, and which will then give rise to SGC, which is the superannuation guarantee charge, whereby the ATO will then calculate any outstanding interest, any admin fees and charges payable, and that will then add to an amount additional to the super payable by the company.
And there are increasing obligations as well around superannuation in terms of the amounts that are being paid into superannuation these days as well. So that again is something else for business to be aware of.
Yes.
All right. And so with all of these things that are going on, I mean, what are the triggers that you see people coming to you from? And what can you do when you go into a business that this may have triggered a discussion around administration?
I think we'll all come back down to businesses proactively looking at their cash flow, looking at the business they're doing, their debtors, where their aged payables and receivables sit, really drilling down to that monthly, if not more frequent, cash flow statements to ensure that they have money, sufficient funds coming in to enable all employment costs to be paid on the payday.
And those sorts of triggers and things that people are going to have to be looking at. It's interesting when you think about it, you don't have to have any qualification to set up a small business. You can open a business immediately. And yet there are all of these obligations and things that people are expected to know. And I think that's the hard part, isn't it, as well, is that I imagine you encounter plenty of people where it's a degree of ignorance that would happen that finds them in some of these situations.
And also, you don't know what you don't know. I think there's a difference between ignorance and just simply not knowing. And I think a lot of people fall into the latter. They just don't know what they don't know. And the problem is the risk and personal exposure that can come from being a director. Because if the company is unable to make payment for the superannuation, there's a personal exposure to the director. If it's unable to pay its debts as and when they fall due, there's a personal exposure to insolvent trading. So whilst a business owner may be a good operator, they also need to be a business person to ensure that those risks, those personal exposure risks, are properly and appropriately managed.
And I guess this all falls back down to, as well, a simple thing as a business owner, that if you've got an accountant or a bookkeeper or both, that hopefully that level of communication to let you know about what these changes has happened and systems and processes are being put in place because you've got those resources. Because if you don't have those, then you might be the one sitting there going, I didn't know any of this was happening. And the first time you're hearing about it is listening to this podcast.
Yeah, no, that's true. And I know that there's a lot of the accountants that are business advisors. They are all proactive with their clients, getting them ready for the introduction of Payday Super. And if a business owner out there is finding that they're not getting information from their accountant or business advisor, maybe that's a trigger for them to seek out an alternative advisor who will be able to make sure that their compliance issues are all dealt with.
That's all we have time for in this episode, but I hope you found some value in Darren's advice on being proactive with cash flow and understanding the personal risks directors face regarding superannuation and insolvency. Before we go, I want to mention that there is a workbook available for this episode of the podcast with questions to ask yourself, as well as some key quotes and an action plan. Just head to the show notes and you'll be able to download a copy from the link. Next time on IO Insolvency Options, we're going to take a look at a major shift coming to small businesses, as charging a separate fee for credit card payments is set to be banned from October 2026. Darren discusses the controversial impact of businesses being forced to absorb these transaction costs, the potential for increased inflation, and why high transaction industries like retail may be hit the hardest. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. For details on how to get in touch with Darren and his team on insolvency challenges, please consult the show notes. This podcast is produced by my team at podcastdoneforyou.com.au, helping professionals share their expertise through powerful podcast content. If you found value in today's episode, please like, comment, and subscribe to IO Insolvency Options. Until next time, remember, there's always a way forward when you know your options.